Welcome Outriders to this week's State of Play, where we briefly reflect on the current state of Outriders, along with the future hopes for the current game state. Now today we saw an interesting update from the developers, a rather detailed one at that, outlining some adjustments to come for players. However, I feel rather problematically, it's lacking any form of date or ETA other than soon. That said, the update has covered 4 specific areas. Number 1, a feature fix that's coming to restore those wiped inventory items of yours. Number 2, the appreciation package that's going to be dropped with thanks from the developers. Number 3, the Stadia's Day 1 patch. And lastly, number 4, the future fixes and updates to come. But first, let's talk about the current game state. It's been nearly a week now since the inventory wipe fix that the developers had deployed, and indeed a number of days since they've been assessing those results. From a community standpoint, reading Twitter and Reddit and responses from the community, it's fairly clear that the issue is more or less resolved, although we are still seeing some isolated reports of some wiped inventories across various platforms in the last few days. That said, the devs appear very confident that this has been addressed with most related issues as per my video last week, and they're ready to move on to what I've been referring to as stage 2 of this dilemma, which is restoration. And I must add, People Can Fly and Square Enix are putting a lot of work into this restoration project, perhaps even too much work into this particular project, but I'll leave that for a separate video for now. The restoration approach that they've identified in the notes on their recent post is convoluted. They've identified players in 3 categories: Group A, Group B, or Group C, depending on your attack. Group A basically being those that have a locked inventory and cannot play and have lost inventory items in the process. Group B, those that can play the game that do have access to the character but have lost inventory items in the wipe. And Group C, everyone else, i.e. people that are working functionally normal, I suppose, is the term for it. Now, again, I understand why they're doing this, but there seems to be a layer of complexity here that's been going on, and the reality is what they're trying to do is to make sure all elements are addressed without hurting existing players. So it's clear that this problem is not just surface level, that they need to do analytics, they need to do full reporting, and they need to try and assess what each individual player was holding at the time of the wipe, and trying to, at very best, match what was in your inventory, or at the very least get close to it with God rolls as they've identified. So they're going to provide some pretty good equipment back, but ultimately I think a lot of players will still be disappointed. I don't know, man. I'm seeing a lot of entitlement in replies to this stuff that they're doing, and I kind of got done reading through some of the Reddit replies, to be honest with you. This is a problem. It's not acceptable. It shouldn't be in a looter shooter game, and I completely empathize with you, and we've lost 2 characters ourselves. But I think some of the responses that we're seeing to the devs have just been, I don't know. I just think adding 0 value. That's the restoration approach. Now, when's it coming? We don't know. Soon. Hopefully soon. They don't have an update as yet in terms of a date, but it will be coming. That's the restoration approach. The only other point to consider on restoration is that there's a few parameters that the devs have highlighted in their most recent Reddit post. I do suggest you read it in detail to identify whether you're Group A, Group B, or Group C. Hopefully you're Group C and you don't have to worry. But regardless, as long as you've played the game since launch, you will be getting access to the appreciation package. And indeed, if you did have the inventory wipe, you'll be getting a second appreciation package as well. Speaking of the appreciation package, let's take a look at what the developers are planning for that. Not much additional has been added since last week, but what they have mentioned is that they will deliver the package after the inventory restoration process has been completed, which, to be fair, a lot of us assumed. They also mentioned that they'd like to confirm that they're looking at doing something similar for anyone who has been affected by the wipes, as I mentioned. What can you expect? Well, as we said, as long as you played between March 31st and April 16th, you'll be eligible for the free gear, which will include a level appropriate legendary weapon and a level appropriate amount of titanium. And as a fitting piece of humor, the emote frustration. So that hasn't changed since last week, but it's good to know that's still on track. Again, we don't know when this will be, only that it will be after the restoration has finished. Thirdly, with this update, the devs mentioned the Stadia Updates coming soon. I don't know anyone on Stadia myself, but if you are one of those people, you have been struggling because you have not been benefiting really from some of the stuff that came from the day one patches. There's a bit of a slight irony here. If you're on Stadia, you weren't prone to be receiving these inventory wipe issues because you weren't getting disconnects that a lot of players were using their local game copies based on the fact of how Stadia works in the online streaming environment. The drawback, of course, has been that I suspect, due to the lower count of players in Stadia, that you have been a lower priority. And as a result, these players have yet to see the benefits from the day one patch launched, 2.5 weeks ago? No, more than that now at this point. So if you are Stadia, sit tight. They've mentioned that updates will be coming to you in the week commencing the 26th of April, which unfortunately is still another week out before you, at the very least, will see some further news from the developers. Last but not least, they made reference to future bugs and patches, which is where I think our conversation needs to go just for a little bit in terms of Outriders Performance. That is to say that they have mentioned they'll be doing more patches and balancing to come. And it's fairly clear at this point that there are a number of technical issues that we are seeing, and I think these are going to become more of a problem in the coming week. The reality is many Outriders players, or at least some, have been well through the challenge tiers in the endgame and are 100 plus hours and are in some cases up to challenge tier 14, challenge tier 15. Many players are just about to get into challenge tier or have just in a low level area of challenge tier in the endgame expeditions. And still yet a lot of players have just finished the campaign or are finishing the campaign shortly with a level 30 character ready to start to think about what the endgame might look like. Now the reality of course is that with the way that the co-op is performing right now, we are just not seeing the performance that this game needs in order to play as a co-op game. As a solo game, it's fantastic. As a solo game, it has great loot, an excellent campaign, a great story, and enjoyable progress from level 1 to level 30. Sounds familiar, Anthem? But once that is done, the goal has always been to jump in with your friends, play co-op, and get through the expeditions. And that has always been something the developers have been talking about since the conception of this game. Working through solo, a bit like in the space of Diablo, but then for endgame, working much closely together with your friends to get through endgame and to get that awesome loot. Sadly, we're not able to do that very well right now. We have significant rubber banding, especially if you're a guest to a hosted game. There is delays on abilities when you punch them in multiplayer connections. People still have connection issues, and all this occurs fairly frequently within co-op situations. And that's whether you matchmake or whether you just join people that you know local to you in your country, in some cases like my friend who lives half an hour from me, and still have these issues. So it's a big problem, and I foresee this as being a flag for Outriders in the next week as more and more players enter this space of I need to play multiplayer and I'm not enjoying the experience. So it's going to be a very interesting week to say the least, but at this stage, if you're having some issues and troubles with the online play, you can grin and bear it with the hopeful knowledge now that your inventory is not going to be wiped, but at the same time, you might want to hold off. If you're looking to play with your mates and you want to have a good, stable co-op experience, I suggest perhaps holding until we have more information from the developers about what that exactly looks like. So that's the 4 things that I think are being covered in this update today. As I said, I think that perhaps the devs are adding more complexity here than is needed, but at the same time, it's good to see they are responsive, they're working with community, and they're trying to do their very best to resolve the issues that they've had in these first few weeks. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What has your experience been like to this point? Are you at the end game doing CTs, high-level CT, CT14, CT15? Are you just approaching the CTs now? Are you still finishing the campaign? Curious to hear where everyone's at right now, but no doubt, very exciting for those that have enjoyed the game. It's been a hell of an experience. We've really enjoyed the loot game. We've enjoyed the grind. We've enjoyed playing the game. I don't think anyone argues that, but there's still a long way to go for us to get this game functioning, and hopefully, the developers will be able to get there very, very soon. I am Orgaz for Luda Universe. You can of course also follow us on Twitter, which is @LudaUniverse, and Outriders, I will see you next out in Enoch.
I feel a star.